In light of the fall garden season beginning in a couple months, I'm going to be giving you some tips for both indoor and outdoor fall gardening. The fall garden season runs usually from like the end of August until like usually like the beginning of winter when you begin planting your spring garden. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you some tips for some indoor and outdoor fall garden. So for starters, we're going to start off with some indoor fall garden tips. Well, for starters, we're going to always need to make sure the room temperature is the perfect room temperature for your garden, because you do not want to be giving your plants like a really cold environment. Most people have their house temperatures at around like 72 degrees. Ours in the winter is usually like 66 degrees, which is fine enough for some plants. The thing is a little bit chillier, but they don't really care because it has been 66 degrees in July here in the Northeast. Although it wasn't 66. Earlier today it was like 91, but it's since fallen into the 60s after we got a pretty nasty thunderstorm over here. And as you can clearly see over here, our garden is prospering pretty well. You'll be seeing a garden tour this coming Friday if you're wondering, so turn on your post notifications for that. So why do you need to make sure your room temperature is good? So that way you don't kill your garden. But this one is a little bit less impactful because most people already have their temperature set to a decent temperature. You also really want to make sure that they're either over by a window or they're in a, I prefer an area where you can get some grow lights to like, you could like set up like a little shelf, put some grow lights over it. The reason I love having grow lights in there is for one simple reason. The grow lights are basically like the sun, kind of, except they're for plants. They'll help them grow, and you won't really notice a whole lot of defects with them. As long as they still have some fruit forming, then it shouldn't be a big deal. Now you also want to really transplant those plants as often as possible. Sometimes you might have to get a lot more of those grow lights and expand your area to more areas, because as they get bigger roots. So you're going to want to make sure you're consistently transplanting them, because I made this mistake last fall garden. I accidentally didn't do a whole lot of research before I did. So for this video, I had to learn from my mistakes and create this video and do a whole lot of research. And this is one of them. I forgot to transplant them a whole lot. So I only transplanted them like twice, and I should have transplanted it like 2 more times. So that's what killed my fall garden from last year. So that was quite the interesting run, if I don't say so myself. So yeah, that is exactly why you want to transplant those plants as often as possible, because eventually they'll just grow out of there and they'll kind of just like, they'll begin growing roots into the other area. Another thing is you should water them perfectly, because unfortunately, unless you find a way to do this, you cannot really put an irrigation system inside your house. I mean, be my guest, I don't care. Do whatever you want to do, but for me personally, I cannot find a way to put an irrigation system inside of a house. So what I'll probably just end up doing is I'll just water them myself. Usually about 1 inch or 2 of water per week is good for them. It motivates those plants to grow, and over time you'll begin seeing more fruit forming. That's all a good sign. That means that your plant is prospering inside the house. So you don't want to put them outside until the spring garden comes. And most of these plants do have a lifespan that could potentially go through the spring garden season, but I would highly recommend to replace some of them as well. Some of them that aren't doing too good. When you do the big spring garden transplant, what you want to do is you want to transplant them in the garden afterwards, for a simple reason, because, well, you really want to have the maximum amount of plants for the spring garden season. So what I personally enjoy doing is having more plants for spring garden season than the fall garden season. And if for whatever reason this year my fall garden did decide to prosper, what we would have ended up doing was we would have taken the plants that did really well, put them in the ground with the newer plants, and once those plants had died, we'd like put some more in there. We'd have more growing inside. So I think it's really important that you don't plant everything in your spring garden season that you had from your fall garden season, because there's gonna be a whole lot of like iffy times on there. So that's something I'd recommend. Now for an outdoors fall garden, that's a little bit different. Sadly, I do not have that luxury because I'm from the Northeast, Zone 6B, here in northwestern Connecticut, and in the winter time, we get snow. A whole lot. Last winter, we got like 24 inches of snow the whole winter. That was quite disappointing, but in some winters, we have gotten 3 feet of snow from a single storm, so you do not want to plant your plants outside during that, nah. Plus, just about every day it's below freezing, so yeah, no thank you. Those plants will not survive that condition. So what you really want to do is, if you're going to be planting them outside, you got to make sure you have a little amount of freezes each winter. So if you're in like Georgia or Florida or something like that, you could probably plant them outside. But those areas are not immune to having freezes or frosts. So you want to come prepared for this one. You might want to go to the store, find yourself some frost blankets and stuff like that to go put into your fall garden season. Now, because some of your spring garden stuff may still be around, the fall garden is kind of just putting new plants into the garden. Or for some of the spring garden plants that didn't make it, just rip those out and replace them with the new ones. That's from what I heard from some people. Now, why do you want to plant them outside instead of inside? Well, because you have the opportunity to put them outside. They prefer growing outside way more than they prefer growing inside. And I noticed that a whole lot, except for my green beans who enjoy growing in the windowsill. For whatever reason, like, you cannot stop them from going in there. And the second they go into the ground, oh, they don't care. They'll just die for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the soil or something else, but they enjoy being up in the windowsill up there. So that's something to consider. Why they're better off being in the garden if you're in an area that like has a good amount of seasons for the garden. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of tips because it's literally just like growing a big garden except for the fall. So just be prepared is my biggest tip for this one. You just want to be prepared just in case it begins to get cold out and like just randomly get a frost or a snowstorm or something like that. Because yes, even though you're down south, that sort of stuff still can happen. Because last winter there was a storm that was as far south as Georgia that brought them a couple inches of snow. So that could happen to you too, no matter where you are in the US. So be prepared and not scared, of course. Now, do y'all want to know something? I have a whole playlist for you on screen right now that talks all about the stuff that's happened so far this spring garden season. I think I've made about 20 videos about the garden and some other similar things this season. You can check them all out. All of that stuff is right there. What you waiting for, man? What you still watching for? I expect you'd be there. I'll see you there.